I think that the antiquated nature of that literature is why it's hard to relate the two. But
threw me off is literally as I was thinking about this, I was like, oh yeah, it's like what Ex Machina. I was like, oh, that's what they're raving about, and I was like, whoa. How 1860 something that was written, and it applies better to AI than anything else that's been written since.
This is the verse. Just there's a black crow singing across from me. His wiry legs are crossed. He's dangling my keys. He even fakes a toss. Whatever it could be, it be that has brought me to this loss. It's like, again, the notion that, and I have a particular fascination with that song because I looked at the lyrics 9 times differently, but
that sounds like an odd.
It's an interesting song.
Getting into numerology.
No, but it was the closing of my master's. Finishing
it was the closing of my emo phase.
No, it was the closing out of my master's degree that I was listening to that, and it's possible that I was just overtired, but it was very.
Well, you were secretly projecting. There's nothing in the song.
It was correlative.
Everything is Dumbo's magic feather. There was no depression in the song. The depression was in you all along.
Anyway, no, it's true. Definitely, I think what it the extrapolated argument you can take from this, because obviously AI is only going to reflect and really not going to have any sort of personal effect of our projections into it, I suppose.
But that doesn't mean that it won't amplify what we give it, which is why, again, the threat it poses is essentially the same threat nuclear weapons posed. Not that they themselves could do anything inherently dangerous. I mean, it's a little bit less obvious in that instance because obviously that level of destruction was never possible before. But the threat was not in the things. The threat was in the fact that it's a capability we probably aren't ready to wield.
Which is what Oppenheimer and many others understood.
Yeah, but I think that's why I was proud of my Mirror Man's not ready to look into yet. It's like, if you go into it with the knowledge that what it's going to be feeding you is essentially, if you think of it as a way to interact with the sum of human output, like that alone, that could also be its own mythological story. I mean, it's imagine the Oracle of Delphi, where it's just
right. That's
you go and ask it a question, and it doesn't even have to be a thing. It could just be a person who gives you this answer that's the sum of all human wisdom on the subject. It's like that alone is fascinating, and that's why I still think.
Well, in the Matrix, for instance, the Oracle is a part of the Matrix still, so the same argument could apply, where it's just like, do they understand what they're giving you? Not really. It's like, yeah.
So I think I'm not. This is the thing. This is a bit of an arc I'm on a personal level. Is that I'm not as much of a Luddite as I might have been a while ago, because I think things like social media and now this AI stuff. You could and I have been very I've never really been anti-AI because it's never been relevant before, but like I am, and I even still am, and have certainly been more so very anti-social media, but there is a part of me that's like, what I mean when I say social media is really not the thing, it's what it's used for.
The culture happens,
it's the things that it proliferates, because it, again, is just spitting back out what's put into it.
Yeah,
and so I guess
unfortunately it's
what I'm upset with is what people put into it, not what it is. I think there's an element of problem to the fact that it's basically been revealed that like Twitter is effectively a hate multiplier.
Right.
Like if you actually look into its source code, it's not overt, because I'm not going to take the conspiratorial view.
Well, it's an echo chamber.
But it is basically the thing that promotes tweets on Twitter is interaction. But not just, likes, it's retweets. And I forget the breakdown of it, because someone who knew programming basically broke it down where it's like, it wasn't necessarily intended to do this, but the consequence of its amplifying things that get lots of traction is the things that will get the most traction are always going to be divisive.
Well, and it
and thus the things that
as
it and the things that it promotes are always going to be the most polarizing.
Right, exactly.
And so we think social media is this toxic hate place, but it's like, no, we're just the toxic hate place. Twitter only makes it worse because it's, again, amplifying everything we put into it. Right. Even the things we don't realize are us.
Well, and this is why I say...
I take the Randicus position. We all need to hurry up and get enlightened.
What?
That's okay.
I know what you're talking about, but I don't know what enlightenment has to do with it.
No, that was the whole point of the Book of Randicus. Is his joke of like why he formed his own religion was because it's like we all just need to get enlightened real fast.
Sure.
It's obviously in a comedy, so it's a joke, but I'm just saying like there is an element of people always think that the issues humanity faces are not its fault. It's like, no, every issue we face is because of us.
Yeah.
If we could sort ourselves out, we would never be at risk of anything.
I don't know who needs to hear this today, but whatever you're going through, it's your fault.
Well, I mean, Solzhenitsyn would say the same.
What I was going to say was, with AI, obviously, it does not have it's not affected by our interaction with it, but I would say what's interesting is...
I'm not sure how true that is. I don't know
affected meaning...
There's the claim that every conversation had with it adds to its sort of
Right, I wasn't meaning it
algorithm.
on the conglomeration level. I was meaning on it's not bearing the weight of our humanity, if that makes sense. But what's interesting
because again, if you take the supposition that it's not conscious, it's not going to be like angry and mad.
It's artificial. But what's interesting is we need to then apply, and I'm getting a bit more...
Well, you're trying to get back to the can of worms I had at the beginning.
No, I'm getting a bit more, I suppose, laser focused on the idea that if you then take it out of the realm of artificial and say, you have to recognize
so this is the can of worms. So you are getting into my can of worms.
That your projections when you are interacting with others are going to also reverberate back to you. So it's like you can't...
Yes, but less so because it's going to also have some of their subconscious.
Sure, and their agency obviously affects that, but all I'm saying is...
Whereas the computer has none, so it is purely you.
We cannot get upset, and I suppose I've seen this many times where people get upset when they give you or give somebody a particular feedback and then don't want that to somehow come back to them.
You're the fault by bringing this to light. I'm going to show you the meme I made earlier. This will be... I'll interrupt whatever visuals I use for this section. I'm going to interrupt with this meme. In fact, I'll show the previous one. I mean, you've already seen it. I'll show the previous one I made as well. Where did I put all these? Here they are. You've obviously already seen this one, which I was proud of.
Right.
But this is what I was thinking of the day when I was referencing the DW meme. And this is really what I was trying to get it to say. I'm rather proud of it.
I wanted to stop because I can't bear to examine my own subconscious.
I'll put an image of that on screen. I made that meme because we were having this conversation off air where I was like, this is what most people are like. A lot of people are just like, if you say something negative or if you point out something negative about me, I can't possibly take that into my subconscious because I'm afraid of my subconscious. So I'm instead going to just be mad at you for bringing this to light. Because you could have... This actually... I was thinking about the blackmail conversations that we had in the Saints Row video where I realized... We talked about why blackmail is illegal and why I don't quite understand it. Because what's true about it is, effectively, it's like the opposite of, like those crisis PR companies where it's like if a company has an issue and they'll hire this external, like, to help them spin things.
Right.
It's effectively the exact opposite of that, where rather than you paying someone to help you build positive rapport, you're essentially paying someone to prevent negative rapport. And that's where I feel like this comes into that conversation, because if you do something bad that will damage your reputation, you can't get mad at the guy who's now going to use that against you because you did the thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Which means that if he weren't in the way, like, he's offering for you to pay him to prevent this from becoming an issue.
Yeah, but don't you know that would require me to actually take responsibility?
Now, of course, you would argue that, well, it's sort of extortion. It's not extortion. It's not a great thing.
What's more American than that?
But my point is, the consequences, people act like, well, you'd be damaging their reputation. It's like,
no,
that's why it's illegal. But I'm like, no, I'm simply offering them the chance for this to not damage their reputation. Because the consequence, again, we get back to my whole philosophy about the choice is the consequence. Which means when you do this thing, the bad reputation comes with it. And you might have been thinking you could get away with it, but it was always following you.
You may need to stave it off a little bit.
And this guy is literally basically saying, hey, if you pay me, I'll stave it off a little longer.
Yeah.
And this is why I'm like, I do agree that, as I was thinking about it, if you witness someone commit a crime and then try to blackmail them, that would technically be illegal. Not for extortion, but because that would essentially be withholding evidence. You're obstructing justice.
Yeah, exactly.
Whereas in a non-legal thing where it's like you would just have, if you have evidence of an affair or something that would be damaging to the interpretation or the reputation, but it isn't illegal, I'm like, I still don't quite get why it would be considered a crime. Because you're effectively offering.
We have a government that
it's extortionate.
Pokes their nose into bad form.
It's extortionate, sure.
I agree.
But I also feel like the consequences that you're threatening them with are the consequences of their own actions. It's not like an external. It's not because you tried to make the argument that it's not like, well, they could argue similar damage to like it's the same as assault, but it's not. Rather than physical damage, it would be reputational/emotional damage. But again, I'm like, assault is. That? You said something like that, but it's
about blackmail, or was
assault,
it about?
No, yeah, because it was in this conversation. But it's like the baseline of human interaction is not assault. Like if you go about your day,
that's true.
If everyone went around their day normally, no one would punch somebody else. That's an interpersonal conflict. So if everyone was following, the natural rights of man, because I don't want to redound to the law, then no one would get into this kind of confrontation. Whereas if you do a bad thing, the consequences of it will find you.
Sure.
So the idea that like the blackmailer is the one threatening you with this, it's like, no, he's in fact alleviating this. He's simply charging you for it.
Which is a little.
Which again, you'd say, is it kind of a racketeering sort of thing? Maybe. But I think it's born of this notion that like he's the problem, because if it weren't for him, no one would know. And that's like, how long would you think that's going to last?
Yeah.
Because the consequences will always catch up. Now, anyways, that's just meme sidebar. But it is, it's a similar thing where it's...
All I'm saying is when you interact with people, how much more on a non-artificial level are people going to be affected by the projections you make to them? And the more
I think that
the less you're able to look at your own subconscious, the more you are going to project.
Did I not quote the exact quote from Jung, which is the degree to which you see evil in others is the same degree to which you are blind to it in yourself.
Right. I mean, and it's what's tragic is when other people make criticisms of you. I found that
you take the Epictetus approach, which is to say, he must not know me well, for there are far more faults he could mention.
You're exactly right, because for me, the more I was able to look at my own flaws and go, okay, I'm going to apply the things or adjust the things that I can and kind of go about self-improvement, and the things that don't really apply and I go, they just have a poor understanding of who I am, then you just let it be.
That's why I like that quote. Just
it makes you
there are far more faults he did not mention. I'm just like that, because that totally takes the wind out of anyone's sails, being like, I know you did this. Yeah. I know myself very much better than you do, pal. You'll never surprise me by telling me things I did.
Well, and I think what it does also.
But again, I think that that has to be true. Not everyone knows themselves.
It helps you live a very unoffendable life too, which is a part.
I wouldn't say unoffendable.
Well, I'm saying maybe not unoffendable, but it
takes everybody's ammo away. Because that's what I mean by unoffendable. This is also what I was getting to with the blackmail concept. It takes the power away from others. Because if you say to someone, you can either pay me or I'll let this leak, a responsible and mature person would say, let it leak, because it's the consequence of my action, and I will face it, because that's a very stoic principle.
Well, it's Locke.
Well, yeah, sure. That's why I like that film, and why
take it on. Like, what does he say when he's arguing with his father in the back?
I don't remember, but I mean, it's like, this is literally it's like, okay, I will, because literally there's nothing a blackmailer can do, because the worst they can do is what they threaten.
Right.
Which is, and if you're totally unafraid of it, they're not gonna probably, I mean, they might still go through with it out of spite, but there's much less of a likelihood that they're gonna bother. Because if you are like, I'm not afraid of the consequence, then they're going to be like, oh, well, okay.
If you do this, your life is forfeit. Then it is forfeit.
Well, yeah, it's like people, they're banking on the fact that you're afraid of the consequence. So if you're just like, okay, I'll deal with whatever consequences of my own actions.
Yeah, exactly.
You kind of take the wind out of their sails.
Yep.
Now you have to back that up. You can't be bluffing and then go, oh, I didn't expect them to do it, and I wasn't going to prepare for the consequences. But if you're genuinely like, I'll deal with whatever consequences come my way,
well, and
then you're literally impenetrable.
It's a far more interesting way to live your life too, because
radical, what's the word? Radical autonomy or something like that?
Not just that. I'm saying to just be somebody that actually owns their choices, both good and bad. It's like, yeah, life happens. Sometimes it sucks. Other times it's great. I mean...
Yeah, because then no one can ever throw something in your face and be like, here's this... It's a little bit of like, this is somewhat of a dark way to view it, but it's like, if you're your own worst critic, nobody else could be worse. It's like, yeah, whatever you say about me, buddy, I already know that I'm way worse than you think I am. Oh, you won't surprise me.
No, it's going to get a lot worse.
It's like, yeah, you're not going to surprise me. You're not going to make me go, I didn't know that about myself, unless you don't know yourself. But even then, if you don't know yourself and someone says this about you, you're more likely to get angry and be like, how dare you?
It's a reframing. Know thyself.
Yes, where does that actually originally come from?
I believe is that not Aristotle?
I don't remember who.
I'm fairly confident
it was a mythological story, but maybe
I'm fairly confident it's Aristotle.
Well, it's a Greek of someone, because they were just smarter. As I've delved into more of this, I'm like, wow, the Greeks.
They were smarter on a philosophical level.
We don't just revere them because of, like, history. It's like, no, they actually were on to quite a number of things. And we just don't give them the credit.
Anyway.
Shall we get into the can of worms? Because I'm not done yet. But I want, now that the flavor of this has sort of effectively washed away, I'd like something else. So,
or is this going to be broken up?
It's long enough that we could have, we're probably already in episode 2.
Oh.
And I just didn't know it. So I'll get into the can of worms and we'll probably still hit the 2-hour mark. But what should we have for drinking next? Because this orange thing went south. Should we go to the other orange thing, or should we have a cream soda break?
I feel like that's going to make it. Let's do that, because I feel like the cream soda needs to be the chaser at the end.
Someone's got to stay on the mic and sing us a song. You're the piano
Sing a song. No,
you've never been the one who has to fill before. I'll get to see what you say later.
I do find it interesting that, again, as I said before about it being more effective to be broad in knowledge than in depth. I don't think I intended to mean that you shouldn't delve deeply into various contexts of information and knowledge, but that if you are broader read, not only are you able to interact with more as far as culturally what other people are doing, but also it is true that your knowledge becomes far more of a aggregate of many other people's theorized, opinions and things of that nature. And so not only does I believe it make you more informed, but also, again, makes you far more adept at conversing with other people's various opinions.
I think you're full of it.
So...
you want to explain what you were saying, or should I just find it out in the editing?
You should just find it out of the editing. But I do think that it will be helpful to anybody that wants to do that. Again, we've said many times, but debate and being able to actually have conversations with people who differ in your opinion, very helpful. Don't be some tool that doesn't actually have willingness to have conversations.
Yes, indeed. And one today is worth 2 tomorrows. That's my 2 cents, courtesy of Jones Orange Soda. So this smells much more like what I was hoping. Like, this smells like, orange citrus. This claims to be an orange soda and cream soda mix. It kind of smells mostly like orange soda. I also appreciate... it's been an hour and a half. I feel like glass gets colder way faster. Because I feel like aluminum cans take forever to get properly cold.
Well, we've said many times the superiority of glass is really, it's a shame that we don't use it anymore. And
that's interesting. You should give that a try.
The only thing I have a problem with about Jones is the fact that it's very sugar heavy.
Well, I feel like you're barking up the wrong tree with all sodas, because this is no more calories than the average soda.
Oh.
You don't like that? If anything, I feel like this is a slightly more natural feelings. That was a reaction.
No, I do not.
What? Why not?
Ooh.
This is better to me than that, because...
Who?
Who am I? I don't know why you don't like this, because I'm getting the cream.
This?
I'm getting the same creaminess, but it doesn't feel as artificial as that creaminess. This feels more like, this genuinely tastes like if you took an orange soda and a cream soda and mixed them, and you get the same effect that the honey was giving.
I think I was hoping for more of a orange cream ice cream taste, and that's not what I'm getting.
No, this is much more like just orange Fanta in a cream soda,
which isn't good.
I don't think it's that bad at all. I think they combine pretty well.
I'm not a fan of that. It's
Why?
Maybe just something about the fact that
you just might not like orange sodas in general.
I'm not a huge fan of orange sodas as a general metric, but
because this is not at all bad to me. This, if anything, tastes like a slightly more... This is kind of what I expected that to taste like. Where it's like, it's more creamy. It's not as acid heavy as most orange sodas.
I disagree. This one's far more acid heavy than the other one.
Well, by far more than that,
now,
but not in comparison.
Dish soap taste.
Not in comparison. This is not more acidic than like Fanta is.
No, that's true.
So it's like, this is more like a creamy orange. That was more like melted sort of like orange Jello melted down.
That we found out later had a price to pay.
This is, I mean, I'm not like, ooh, my new favorite soda, but for an orange cream, I'm like, this is pretty much what I was expecting. We'll see. I mean, that took a while.
What you were wanting.
That took a while before that hit, so maybe there's an aftertaste I just don't know here, but I like this off the bat more. There you go, second soda review. I like Jones in general. I like their odd... My favorite Jones, which they don't sell... I mean, maybe they do. I don't see it most places, is where they had the blue bubblegum soda.
Is that the one that I had in my wedding?
It was also blue, but that's a fairly typical... It's like blue raspberry or something. This was blue bubblegum, and it basically tasted like if you just, again, took Sprite and melted bubblegum in it. Like... hardcore, old school, big from a gumball machine bubblegum.
Huh.
So again, if you're not into that kind of super sugary fake, tastes like you just snorted a bunch of pixie sticks. I liked that though because I was like 14 at the time.
What, snorted pixie sticks?
No, I was doing that when I was 9.
Doing lines of pixie.
I do wonder what that would do to you.
It jacks you up. I have done it and it sucks.
Through your nose, not just like, why?
Because I was stupid.
That's the biggest bar for me in any kind of drug use is,
It wasn't a drug, obviously. I was like...
No, but I'm attempting to expand on that, obviously. But like, is there such a thing as like nasal retentive? Because I'm not an anal retentive person. But I admit I do have a weird issue with like if
don't stick that up my nose.
If my nose is clogged or if I get a cold, like the way people sort of personify the concept of anal retentive, where it sort of leads people to be kind of weirdly
got to stick up their rear.
Well, but I mean that's again a euphemistic. I'm saying in terms of actually like it makes people kind of on edge or something.
Well, it's very type A.
I get like that.
I suppose I'd use the word buttoned.
Yeah, but to me, it's like it's a nasal thing. If my nasal passages are screwed up, it throws me off.
I agree with you, but for me, it's ears. If I cannot hear normally, I'm screwed for the day.
See, that to me, it's all about nose for me. So that's why I'm like, if I any drugs that require me putting things in my nose, I'm like, sorry, no, not gonna happen to me. Not that this is the only barrier to drug use. It's one of them.
You know what else is addictive? Heroin.
Anyways, can of worms.
Yeah.
So
open them.
pour them into your vodka or tequila or whatever it is. We touched on this, and we sort of kept dancing around it because I didn't realize, I mean, in retrospect, it came to me after I had the original thought experiment, but I do start to see now, looking back, how tied into it is, because essentially, the thing that I think poses the risk for AI, as we touched on, it's again going to be an amplification of your own, what you put into it, but I think as it becomes more sophisticated, well, okay, allow me to create the bridge we're going to use to pass over. And specifically, I think with Ex Machina, this was more relevant because of the fact that it was also an android as well as an AI. It wasn't just a box, a terminal that you typed into.
Right.
There comes a point at which, like we said with the Chinese room, you wouldn't be able to tell whether it was conscious or not. And if you take something like an android and program it with not just a knowledge but also a sort of fake personality, the question then would be, as it grows in sophistication, could you ever be certain that its quote-unquote emotional reactions were ever real? Or would, as we insist with the Chinese room thesis, it would simply be responding in a way that it deems appropriate to your whatever you're putting in. And thus, its emotional reactions, as convincing as they might be, and again, the more sophisticated it gets, the more it will be good at sophisticated mimicking.
But it's still mimicry.
But here's the problem is, when you reach a certain point, I mean, this is sort of an alternate definition of the singularity. It's like, you reach the point at which you can't tell. I think that opens up a whole new level of threat, because it's essentially...
But it's not ever... It's not ever conscious, you know. It's a threat, certainly.
No, that's not what I'm getting at, because it has a threat, but again, it's not the threat. We are the threat, and it could amplify us. But this is the point at which... I mean, that same is true. That same thing's true. But it opens up a new area of... As we said that people don't take the Chinese room seriously, I think once this day comes when, you know, AI, robots, and that's probably a ways off because robots are further behind AI, surprisingly enough, despite the fact that we've been working on robots for much longer. But if that day comes... Which
gives me some humorous hope. There's a degree of levity in that. If you've ever seen, you know, I think there was one particular time, and I think it was in 2012 or something like that, Honda had released like this new robotics program that they were doing, and he's walking up these stairs all intensely, and all of a sudden just like...
That was a long time ago, though. It was. Boston Dynamics does scary things.
Sure, and I'm not saying that it's not...
I say scary. It's not actually scary because, again, I don't think they're threats, because those are certainly not threats because they're not controlled. They're just machines that do what you tell them.
Sure.
They're only threatening in so much as someone could misuse them.
I was only getting at the fact that sometimes, for as smart as we think we are,
Well, but I'm saying that's what's freaky about it is we've been working on robots since like 1940.
Right.
And we've only just got them to a point where they're this capable, whereas AI, it's been like, it's been a theory since like... I guess the days of Turing, but really since the 90s and the conception of the internet was when it began truly being developed, and then it's only in the last few years that it's really actually happened. So I'm just saying it's funny that robots have been something we've sort of linearly been growing in progression, whereas AI was just sort of like exponential, where it's like, it's finally like, oh, they're here. But anyways, my point is, I guess I'll pose this question as another thought experiment. I won't have a name for it yet. You can give it the name. Imagine... Well, okay, I suppose I'll ask the question nowadays. With things like the replica AI fake girlfriend thing, that's weird, and everyone recognizes that it's like, this is a deeply unhealthy.
That's weird.
This is a deeply unhealthy behavior, and everyone can understand why. But I would ask you to give me the answer of why. As much as it might seem obvious.
Because it's fake.
I'm going to elaborate and take this to a future level where you now have not only sophisticated AI that can replicate, which we are almost at, basically, can replicate a unique individual personality, which again raises the question of how could you know that it's conscious or not. And again, the point is you kind of can't. You would never be able to prove that it's not conscious.
Right.
Because once it reaches a level of sophistication, it will mimic consciousness so well that you'll never be able to disprove it.
Sure. Take
that and take the robotics to a level where I'm going to stop at multiple stages along this progression. So let's say now we have AI, apps that could basically fake being an external girlfriend. Take it 20 years in the future, there's now, it's going to come, and it's going to be a very frightening...
very poor choice.
It is. It is, because this is where I'm going. It's going to happen, and this is why it's a frightening thing, but there's going to come a day when there is some kind of animatronic doll, and then I would say, okay, the same question, if you take that, give it a personality, that would also be, what's your reasoning for why that would be wrong?
Eventually, so twofold. Number
Other than
one,
that it's fake. I mean, is that the same, or is there a different reason?
It's expounded upon. It's the same, but it's different. So the moral answer, obviously, is that I believe on a creation level that the one creator, whatever you want to call, God, is the one that has put everything into motion and therefore gets to dictate the rules of engagement. Now, here's the other thing, though, because that's something you can't get away from. Because in the same... We're about to get demonetized.
Oh, we've never been monetized.
In the same way that something like, homosexuality or something like that is a problem.
I'm more concerned about getting doxxed.
Is that the final argument, if you play that out to its reductio ad absurdum,
you're going to take the Catholic position.
Is death to the human race. It is.
Oh, so you're again. But then that's more consequentialist.
Okay, but it's the same principle.
Actually, in fact,
it's the same principle. If you are embracing fake, the more people embrace fakeness, because the bottom line is AI interaction is easier. Why? Because it doesn't require anything of us.
Well, now here's you've stumbled into, in a way I didn't expect, actually, the same issue. Because you could say, and in fact, I will take, you're saying, that the inevitable consequence is the fact that, you can't mate with a artificial thing.
you can use it as some sort of a
in essence there would be no different
ejaculatory tool, but it's
gosh, that's the most horrifying sentence.
Well, it's true. I mean, you could.
There's a reason they don't advertise them that way.
Well, sometimes they do. Maybe not quite that.
I don't. Well, when you're buying them from China from a bootleg website, maybe that's what they call it.
I'm just picturing. Now I'm just picturing like this. Okay.
Well, don't picture it.
No, I'm not going to anymore.
Oh boy.
Anyway.
Well, okay. I think we can agree. But in essence, I'm attempting to demonstrate that, like, all along the process, we could say at every point, A, it's fake. B, I mean, you're taking the consequentialist doom of the human race. I would even say, let's take it from the sort of, I'll take a Catholic position, which might sound a bit strange, which would be that it would be wrong in the same sense that even if it wasn't an animatronic and it was just one of the currently available varieties of these things, it's morally wrong because it perverts the natural
image of God.
Well, that's not quite. I'm even more specifically. It perverts the natural, I guess, consequence where it's like, okay, this is meant to be procreation for the sake of raising children, which, yes, also is for the propagation of the human race, but that's also the divine.
That's what I was getting back to as far as the source code to a degree. It's
well, and I would take slight issue just because that's a very slippery slope to say.
Well, things work in a very particular manner.
Yeah, but I'm always weary of the concept of like, treading on God's domain, because it's like
No, I'm not worried about that. What I'm saying
that is basically what you said, where it's like, well, you'd be subverting the original plan, as it were.
Yes,
And it's
and you can't. All I'm saying with that, you can do it. I'm just saying all you have to recognize is it does have consequences.
I agree with the consequences, but I think you have to demonstrate the consequences, in my opinion. You don't just say, well, God never intended us to do that. It's like, and how do you know that?
Right.
Like, how do you know what God... I imagine he wasn't sitting up there going, I never thought they'd get this far. I didn't even think that was possible. All those electrons and stuff, I didn't know what they could do. I imagine that the things we've discovered are things that are like, yeah, we discovered them because they're in nature,
right?
Which we were told to be the masters of.
Right.
So I'm not of the opinion that simply because it's advanced that it means we're treading on God's toes.
No, that's...
If anything, I actually think that that's a very... arrogant argument to think that you ever could.
On that.
No, exactly. I'm not saying that was your opinion, but I think that opens the door when that kind of language is used.
See, I don't know if it does. Well, what I'm saying is that there's no way around.
God as the creator gets a say. Or I forget exactly your wording where it's like he gets to decide how things go, and I'm like.
My point is there is no way around that. I mean, I'm saying the same thing you are.
If you say, yes, you can't avoid the consequences, yes, that's true. But I'm saying the idea that, like, well, God doesn't want you to do that. It's like, well, how can you ever know that?
No, exactly.
But anyways, that's a whole other thing. But if you take the Catholic moral tradition, which is that is meant to be a procreational activity, which therefore, if you do it, it's a way that subverts that, you are subverting its purpose.
Sure.
Let's take it to the maximum futuristic level, and let's suggest you could have full-on android robots that are not only capable of personality and all these other things, but that actually have, like, implanted embryonic whatever, so that effectively they could gestate a child, and you could then theoretically have an android capable of producing offspring. This is, of course, very scientifically hypothetical.
Well, but I'm saying the reasonable nature of that science would still be artificial, meaning that the egg would be donor. You know what I mean?
Yes.
So, I mean, you're still...
Or there could be, by that point in the future, there might be some form of genetic manipulation where you could...
There's not. They've tried that so many times, and I'm sorry, I'm one of those people that they've
tried that now. Yeah, but see, this is where you're going slippery slope.
I'm not saying it's not a slippery slope.
It is, because
on an artificial level, why is it that we can't still, to this day,
because how long have we been trying?
Certain things
how long have we been trying?
That actually take... our body still, for instance, knows when something is artificial that we put inside of it. It doesn't function in the same manner.
But that doesn't mean that it doesn't function at all.
Sure.
And that's also, again, I think you're taking... How long have we been working? Give me an example and tell me how long we've been working on it, because probably the answer is within the last, 100 years. And that's
sure. I'm not saying that's a
because this is, again, I'm not saying this is your argument, but you are treading on the same kind of argument, that is, if God meant us to fly, we'd have wings.
No, that's not my point.
I know that's not your point, but you're making the same argument as those people, so you have to differentiate.
My point
yourself.
is, there is no way for us to create something out of nothing.
You wouldn't do it out of nothing. I would change genetic manipulation.
So you would still have to have some sort of cellular...
Well, cell, yes, but it wouldn't have to be an egg donor, for example. It could simply be, like...
I mean, on the day that they actually are managing to...
What are they called? Stem cells.
Replicate DNA with stem cell.
This is what I'm saying. We're saying hypothetical. Future, like, obviously, I don't think this technology is really... at all likely. I mean, you can't say impossible, but if it were possible, it's not like 50 years. This is probably like 100 or more.
Yeah, but all I'm saying is, with that, there always is going to be a necessity for real
manipulation, sure, but I'm saying it wouldn't have to be like purely egg donor. If there were
but all I'm saying is you're talking macro versus micro. I mean,
but my whole point is not to argue the science of it, but I'm saying we're using the science to explore the metaphysics and the morality of it. I do have to wonder what would be, at least by a Catholic interpretation, and even by your argument, it's like, okay, you've now
over there. I don't know
you've
what
now
you
subverted because now it no longer spells the doom of the human race, and technically speaking, it is no longer because it is no longer subverting the initial purpose of a sexual act, because you could actually produce offspring with these hypothetical androids.
So if I am
I don't know what the answer to that is.
So, well, my answer would be someone has to be the actual organic matter to create the again, if stem cell gets to the point that it's actually able to create not just DNA strand, but also a full blown egg that's required to gestate and create an actual human being, the organic material is still 100% purely human. There's no hybrid artificial AI part of it.
Save for the argument that theoretically, if this could be done, you would only need a donor once, because theoretically the offspring that's produced would be that sort of hybrid of a the problem is the nature of the science is so unsure that I don't know what kind of genetic stuff you could what would the genetic component actually look like, because obviously you would have a human component and a pseudo-human component. Then the question is, what would that produce? I mean, the awkward thing about that is that it effectively would be then you would, at least if the science were to be workable, you would essentially end up producing a fully human offspring from non-fully human parentage, which is weird. Which means that you would never have a truly hybrid. It's not like the child would be a hybrid cyborg.
Yes.
Because that's not the nature of
precisely. Well, that's just all I'm saying. Logically,
if you could genetically manipulate the DNA, I mean, again, this is so hypothetical that knowing what the consequences of that...
It would still just be modified DNA of humans.
But it would self-replicate at that point, which means the child would have its own DNA separate from the parents again. At which point you've taken something synthetic and something real and created something... Is it half synthetic? Well, okay, I'm saying if you take...
That's all I'm saying.
It would be synthesized if it's not an egg donation. That would literally be just take it from the woman, put it in the robot.
Which is the easiest way now.
I'm presuming some kind of genetic manipulation that does not require it to have ever been an egg. It's some form of DNA manipulation.
Sure.
That can be grown.
Stem cell, that's fine. But what I'm saying is,
which would imply that it's still a synthesized by the mathematical definition of the term.
Yes, but it
as in created from some two other components.
I'm going to use the.
It would still be a synthesized DNA.
It's synthesized.
It's not the DNA of a person.
Example as
that DNA would not match any living being.
Yes, only because you've modified it.
That's the definition of synthesized in my point. As in literally like a synthesizer.
Sure, but without that organic material, you wouldn't be able to do that.
But you would only have to do that once, because then the child that's produced would have its own unique DNA and the capability to reproduce.
That's fine. Then my only issue is then you're hamstrung on at this point you'd have to take it to a metaphysical level of the psychology of it and
this is precisely my point. And the science is not the point. The question is
because at this point, obviously, the moral argument at this point is out the door.
And that's my point. Is I'm not trying to say that therefore it wouldn't be wrong, because I think everybody has the instinctual reaction of that still something's off, but we can't. Well, I'm simply trying to say what's off, because if we establish that at least the morality as it is currently framed would be resolved, what is the remaining morality yet to be resolved?
I think as it's currently framed is a good way of putting it, because in the same way that we have to interpret the biblical text and reframe it for our current context, I think it's important for us to do the same if we are to extrapolate future events, because I'm one of those people that believes that not only reason but science also should always support or be in accord with, for the most part, what's going on theologically. Now, I want to clarify that statement, because I know some people are going to be like, well, that means that you allow science to dictate your theology. No. What I'm saying is, most of the time, if you begin with a biblical worldview, there's much of science that will support what is going on in that context.
That's exactly my point, is that we started with that. We had our Catholic definition of why it would be wrong, and then we resolved that.
So here's my issue.
So there must be some other reason it would be wrong.
This is what I mean.
So we have to accept that it is.
On a scientific, psychological level, what would be wrong with that is that you are now substituting genuine interaction for synthesized interaction.
You now touch upon precisely the can of worms, which is, if a day like this were ever to come, you're still going to keep drinking that even though you don't like it?
I mean...
Or is it growing on you?
It's growing on me. It's not terrible, but...
You see, there you go. We would then, in this hypothetical day and age, have a very hard time dealing with the question of solipsism. Because the point of solipsism and the issue with it is that it is thoroughly unprovable. You can make all the arguments you want for how you're technically the only real existing person, that everything else is just a construct. But here's the thing:
but see, Sonder exists for a reason. Because
that's not.
It's the
no, that
exact antithesis of solipsism. Yes, it is.
No, because that's in you.
No, it's not.
Yes.
Sonder is.
It's a thing you think.
No,
therefore it originates
Sonder
with
is
you.
an understanding that everyone has consciousness that's out of you. That's what Sonder
which occurs in your brain, which means it comes from you. Emotions occur within your brain. You can't argue that they can be influenced by external events, but nonetheless they are in your brain first and foremost.
I mean,
that's precisely the point. Is you can't prove solipsism, nor can you disprove it, because the mechanisms by which you would go about proving either for or against have been taken off the table. So solipsism essentially exists.
What methods do you have now that you think would be more helpful than...
Well, this is my point, is that we don't. But the problem is we've all kind of ignored solipsism for the most part, because it's one of those thought experiments that's like... Because it's unprovable, and also because I would argue, because very few people would call themselves solipsists. And of that people, I think like 98% of them are just lying. Because the fact of the matter is, if you witness someone get shot in the street, you would react as if some kind of human tragedy has occurred, at least if you're a mostly normal person. Like, threaten to kill the loved one of any solipsist, and they're no longer going to be a solipsist. Because I think they're it's sort of like you can be well, that's more of a what's the word I'm looking for?
Theist?
No, I'm saying that's more of a platitude. Yes, because that's not actually true. Whereas what I'm saying is, generally speaking, people who are solipsists are conscious solipsists and subconscious not solipsists. Because if you were to threaten a member of their family, they wouldn't act like, well, it's only a part of my subconscious, so you might as well. Unless, I would say, the only true solipsists are actual, like, psychopaths, who have no regard, nor care, nor concern for the lives of others. Because they're the only people actually living out what solipsism means.
Sure.
You can hold in your mind that, like, no one else truly exists, but you don't act that way, which means subconsciously you don't truly believe it.
Well, it's a bit of a nihilistic approach, because basically at that point, what little meaning we can derive from life through human interaction.
I would also argue most people who call themselves nihilists aren't, by the same token, because you don't live as if you were.
Sure.
Because subconsciously speaking,
you have to find meaning somewhere.
You're living your life for some reason, whether or not you know what it is.
Right.
And in the same sense, so I think, again, if you discount psychopaths, who I think are the only people capable of being truly solipsists, we've essentially ignored it, because it's like, the other issue with it is that the cost-benefit of it, because of the fact that it's unprovable, and the fact, therefore, that you could be wrong about it, means that if you were to act out on it and just, like, kill someone just because you're like, they're a construct of my mind and therefore it doesn't matter, the consequences of it are so great, and the chance of you being wrong in your initial assumption is high enough that it's essentially something no one bothers with, again, unless you're a psychopath. Because, like, you can, it'll be hard it would be hard to sit in prison being like, I just killed the subconscious construct of my mind and now I'm being detained by the rest of my mind. Like, I think it's one of those things where it's like, yes, you can think about it as much as you want, but it is ultimately useless because it can't be proven. But in this future context, you now have dubiously conscious entities that you cannot prove or disprove their consciousness. But, unlike humans, you can prove that they originate with you. So theoretically, you could build, in the future, one of these hypothetical cyborg, or not cyborg, but android things. And therefore, unlike a human you interact with, and if you claim to be a solipsist, you could argue that technically you created them of your subconscious mind. But you don't have proof of that, nor do you have proof of their not being conscious. Therefore, you basically act as though they were, because you're deferring to the social expectation.
You act as
all
though
other people. You're acting as though, if you claim to be a solipsist now, unless again you're a psychopath, you are still acting as if other people are conscious entities separate from yourself, because that's how you live. Even if you try to consciously convince yourself that that's not true, you're living as if it was true, which means you don't truly buy your suppositions. But
you certainly don't.
Whereas in the future, you could theoretically know for certain that you created, because that's the issue. There's two elements with solipsism: is you can't prove that these other people aren't creations of your mind, and you can't prove that they're conscious. So in the future, you still can't prove that they're conscious, but you can prove that they're things you made. And that's another thing I don't think humanity's ready for. Because again, we all kind of don't have an answer for solipsism on a theoretical level, because at least at this point in the logical formulation of it, there is no answer. But in the future, the reason it's not a threat in the future for the most part, because there's enough uncertainty about it that no one's really willing to act on it. Because the risks of it are so high, where I
suppose I still don't understand what much it changes. I mean,
well,
it's still theoretical. You know what I mean?
But I'm saying you could imagine a circumstance in which a person has a android that you could do whatever, you could abuse it horribly, and they could justify that within their mind, saying its emotions and its consciousness are fake, and I know that I either bought this or made this, so this would be no different than just you harassing a vacuum cleaner that you made or bought. And yet, there is nonetheless, I think you would have a reaction to the fact that even if you knew that this was an android, which theoretically you wouldn't, if they were sophisticated enough, as an external person I'm saying, you would then never know whether or not any person you dealt with was actually a natural human, treated as or in which case then solipsism becomes now a much more serious threat, because now it's not.
But that's not solipsistic, because solipsistic says nothing exists.
Well, that's true. It's not exactly solipsistic strictly, but my point is,
I understand
the answer to solipsism now would still be the answer to that conundrum later.
Sure.
Because effectively, the reason solipsism doesn't apply now much is because of the fact that it's so nebulous.
And
in the future, it would be much less nebulous.
True, but I suppose my answer would be the same in that what's broken is still a subconscious rendering of interaction with others.
But the trouble is, you would never know.
I'm saying even if it was a fake AI, I'll put it this way. This is going to get really dicey.
This is why I thought this was the true can of worms.